In the outer rim of the Andromeda Spiral, where civilized space ends and the void begins, there exists a truth that every species learns in their childhood. Humans are myths. They're the boogeyman stories told to young ones who misbehave. They're the impossible tales of a species so savage they destroyed their own homeworld, so relentless they never stopped fighting even when facing extinction, so unpredictable they would sacrifice everything for strangers they'd never met. Every rational being knows these stories are fabrications, cautionary tales designed to teach lessons about the dangers of unchecked aggression and primitive thinking. But what happens when the myths walk out of legend and into reality? What happens when a species that was supposed to be extinct for 3,000 years suddenly appears at your doorstep, scarred but unbroken, carrying scars from battles that were supposed to be fairy tales? What happens when you realize that everything you thought you knew about the most feared and revered species in galactic folklore was actually an understatement? Commander Zarathul of the hegemony science vessel Enlightened Inquiry is about to discover that some legends are legends for a reason, and that the truth is far more terrifying and beautiful than any story ever told. The sensor array on a bridge of the Enlightened Inquiry chirped with the soft melodic tone that indicated an anomaly. Commander Zarathul's 4 eyes rotated independently as she reviewed the data streaming across the holographic displays. Her chitinous fingers, evolved for precise manipulation, danced across the control interface with practiced efficiency. "Analysis complete, Commander," reported Lieutenant Kextar from the science station. The young Vraxian's neck frills fluttered with excitement. "The object is definitely artificial. Metallic composition, approximately 2 kilometers in length. But the design—" He paused, his translator struggling to convey his uncertainty. "It doesn't match any known architectural patterns in our databases." Zarathul approached the main display, her tall, insectoid frame moving with the deliberate grace of her species. The object, rotating slowly before them, defied easy categorization. It was clearly a vessel of some kind, but its construction seemed almost primitive by galactic standards. Thick armor plating covered what appeared to be a central hull, with massive engine assemblies jutting from the rear like the legs of some mechanical beast. Weapon emplacements dotted its surface, far too many weapon emplacements for any civilized vessel. "Life signs?" she inquired, though she expected the answer to be negative. The ship appeared dark, drifting without power in the empty space between star systems. "Negative on life signs, Commander." But Kextar's frills drooped with confusion. "The power readings are inconsistent. There's definitely some kind of energy source active, but it's shielded by materials we can't identify. And, Commander, there's something else." Zarathul waited, her patience well practiced after decades of command. "There are markings on the hull. Symbols. They're in the old script, the one from the legend databases." A chill ran down Zarathul's spine, causing her carapace to shift slightly. Every species in the galactic community knew those symbols, though few could read them. They were part of the shared folklore, the universal mythology that had somehow spread across hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. The symbols of the Terrans, the humans. But that was impossible. Humans were extinct, had been extinct for over 3 millennia, if they had ever existed at all. Most scholars agreed they were nothing more than a collective, unconscious creation, a shared myth that served to remind civilized species of the dangers of barbarism and unchecked aggression. "Magnify the hull markings," she ordered, her voice steady despite her growing unease. The display zoomed in, revealing weathered symbols etched deep into the metal. Zarathul recognized them from her xenoarchaeology studies, though she had never expected to see them on an actual vessel. The script was angular, aggressive in its simplicity, nothing like the flowing, elegant writing systems developed by rational species. And there, prominently displayed near what appeared to be the ship's bow, was a name in the harsh human alphabet: UES Retribution. "Commander," Communications Officer Thelros spoke up, her 6-armed form hunched over her station. I'm detecting a faint transmission from the vessel. It's repeating some kind of automated message. Put it through. Static filled the bridge, interspersed with a deep, rhythmic sound that Zarathul slowly realized was breathing. Then a voice spoke, rough, gravelly, speaking in the ancient human tongue, but with translations provided by their universal language matrix. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth ship Retribution. If anyone receives this message, a pause, filled with the sound of labored breathing. We've done what we came to do. The Devourer fleet is gone. Our sacrifice bought you time. Remember us. Remember what we stood for. Humanity endures. Terra enduras. We die so you might live. The message repeated, the same words in the same tired voice, over and over. But as Zarathul listened, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The timestamp. According to their computers, this message had been broadcasting for 72 hours. Kextar, she said slowly, run a full spectral analysis on that transmission. I want to know everything about its source. Minutes passed as the science officer worked. When he finally looked up, his face had gone pale, his frills completely flat against his neck. Commander, the transmission is live, not a recording. Someone is broadcasting that message right now from inside that ship. The bridge fell silent except for the persistent, haunting repetition of the human captain's words. Zarathul stared at the dark vessel on the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. If the transmission was live, then someone was alive on that ship. Someone human. But humans were extinct. Everyone knew that. Commander, Felrose said quietly, there's more. I'm detecting multiple power signatures throughout the ship. Minimal, but consistent with emergency life support systems. And, Commander, there are dozens of smaller craft docked in what appears to be a hangar bay. Fighter craft, by their configuration. Zarathul made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Prepare a boarding party. Full environmental suits, armed escort. We're going aboard that vessel. Commander, Kextar protested. If these are actually humans, the stories say they're dangerous. Unpredictable. They kill without reason, fight without hope of victory, show no mercy even to themselves. Stories, Zarathul replied firmly, though her own doubts gnawed at her. Legends, myths. We're scientists, not children afraid of bedtime tales. That ship contains the archaeological discovery of the millennium. We will not let superstition prevent us from investigating. But, even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. The stories might be myths, but they all agreed on one thing. Encountering humans was dangerous. Not just physically, but in ways that challenged everything civilized species believed about the universe. An hour later, the boarding shuttle scientific endeavor approached the massive human vessel. Zarathul led the team herself, accompanied by 6 armed security personnel and her senior science staff. As they drew closer, the true scale of the ship became apparent. The hull was scarred by weapon impacts, patched with crude repairs, marked by the evidence of countless battles. This was not a ship built for exploration or trade. This was a weapon, pure and simple, designed for one purpose: war. Look at those gun emplacements, whispered Security Chief Mordan, a massive Karathi warrior whose species prided itself on martial prowess. There must be hundreds of them. What kind of enemy requires that much firepower? According to the legends, Kextar replied nervously, humans fought against something called the Devourers. The stories say they were machines that consumed entire star systems, converting all matter into more of themselves. Just stories, Zarathul insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. They found an airlock that appeared functional and initiated docking procedures. To their surprise, the ship's systems responded, equalizing pressure and allowing them entry. The airlock was massive, clearly designed for beings of human proportions, smaller than most galactic species, but the construction was robust, over-engineered in a way that spoke to paranoid, defensive thinking. The interior of the ship was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows down corridors lined with what could only be described as battle damage. Scorch marks on the walls, sealed breaches, the lingering smell of ozone, and something else, something organic and unpleasant. Life signs are stronger here, Kextar reported, consulting his tricorder. Multiple contacts, but they're weak. Very weak. They followed the signals deeper into the ship, passing through areas that told a story of desperate survival. Makeshift repairs using whatever materials were available. Jury-rigged life support systems. Food production areas that had clearly been converted from other purposes. This wasn't just a warship. It was an ark carrying the last remnants of a dying people. The corridors were lined with doors, most sealed, but some hanging open to reveal small quarters cramped with personal belongings. Pictures of faces that could only be human, surprisingly diverse, with varying skin tones and features, but all sharing the same intense, determined expression that the legends described. Children's drawings depicting stick figures standing victorious over monstrous machines. Love letters written in the harsh human script. A teddy bear, worn from countless years of comfort. "Commander," Mordan said quietly, his massive frame seeming small in the oppressive atmosphere of the ship. "These quarters, they're so small. How do they live like this?" "By choice," Zarathul replied, understanding beginning to dawn. "Look at the construction. This ship was built for maximum efficiency, maximum firepower. Crew comfort was secondary to survival. They lived like this because they had to." They reached what appeared to be the ship's medical bay, and Zarathul's breath caught in her throat. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see them. Humans, actual living humans, lying in what appeared to be some kind of suspended animation chambers. Their faces were peaceful, but even in sleep, they bore the scars of war. Missing limbs replaced by crude mechanical prosthetics. Burn scars. The unmistakable marks of radiation exposure. And they were so young. Most appear to be barely past adolescence by galactic standards, though she knew from the legends that humans age differently, live shorter lives, but with an intensity that other species couldn't match. "By the void," breathed Kextar. "They're real. Humans are real." A new voice spoke from behind them, speaking in accented but understandable galactic common. "Yeah, we're real. Question is, what are you?" They turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. Human, definitely human, though she looked like she had been through hell. She was small by galactic standards, probably not even reaching Zarathul's shoulder, but there was something about her presence that filled the room. Her hair was short, practical, streaked with premature gray. Her uniform was patched and repatched, bearing insignia that proclaimed her rank as commander. But it was her eyes that made Zarathul take an involuntary step backward. They were blue, a color rare among galactic species, and they held depths of pain and determination that spoke to experiences no rational being should have to endure. But more than that, they held a kind of fierce, protective love, the look of someone who had seen everything she cared about threatened and had decided that she would die before allowing it to happen again. "I'm Commander Sarah Chun," the human said, and Zarathul realized this was the voice from the transmission. "Captain of the Retribution, and you're the first non-humans we've seen in a very long time. Are you here to help, or do I need to ask you to leave?" The question was asked politely, but there was steel underneath it. Zarathul found herself studying the human more closely, noting details that the legends had never mentioned. The way she stood, balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction. The unconscious way her hand rested near what was clearly a weapon. The way her eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing threats and exits. This was a predator, not in the mindless, savage way the story suggested, but in the way of a thinking, reasoning being who had been forged by circumstances into something that could and would kill to protect what she loved. "We're here to help," Zarathul said, and surprised herself by meaning it. "My name is Commander Zarathul of the Hegemony Science Vessel Enlightened Inquiry. We detected your ship and came to investigate. We We thought humans were extinct. Sarah Chun smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We very nearly were. The Devourers made sure of that. But we're stubborn. It's what we do. She gestured to the medical bay behind her. These are the last. 43 souls, all that's left of Earth's children. They're in stasis because our life support can't handle full crews anymore. I stay awake to maintain the ship, send the beacon, hope someone might find us someday. The beacon, Zarathul said, understanding flooding through her. You've been broadcasting for 3,000 years. Someone had to remember, Sarah replied simply. Someone had to carry the story forward. We did our job. The Devourers are gone. Really gone this time. But someone needed to know what it cost. What we sacrificed. What we lost. She turned away, looking at the sleeping forms in the medical bay, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, filled with a love so profound that it made Zarathul's heart ache. They dreamed of seeing new stars, meeting new friends, building something better than what we lost. They fought and died believing that someday their children's children might live in peace. She looked back at Zarathul, and the commander saw tears on the human's cheeks. You're the first proof I've had that we succeeded, that there really is a galaxy out there worth saving. In that moment, Zarathul understood why the legends had persisted, why every species in the galaxy told stories about humans, even though they believed them to be myths. It wasn't because humans were monsters. It was because they were mirrors, reflecting back what every species could become when faced with impossible choices and unwavering love. Standing in that dim medical bay, surrounded by the last remnants of a dead civilization, Zarathul made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She was going to help these humans. She was going to give them the chance to fulfill the dreams of those sleeping souls. She was going to give humanity a future. But first, she had to learn their past. She had to understand what had really happened in the war that the legends could only hint at. She had to know what the Devourers truly were, and why humans, alone among all species, had chosen to face them. She had to know why 43 sleeping souls were all that remained of the most feared and revered species in galactic mythology. Tell me, she said to Sarah Chun. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And Sarah, who had been alone with her burdens for longer than most civilizations had existed, smiled, genuinely this time, and began to speak. Sarah Chun led them through the corridors of the Retribution to what had once been a briefing room. The space had been converted into something between a museum and a shrine, walls lined with pictures of faces, star charts marking battles that had passed in a legend, and displays containing artifacts that told the story of humanity's final war. You want to know everything, Sarah said, settling into a chair that had been worn smooth by years of use. But understand, this isn't a story with heroes and villains. This is a story about choices, about what happens when you're faced with something so alien, so wrong, that every instinct tells you to run, and you decide to stay anyway. Zarathul and her team found seats around the table, their various forms creating an unlikely council of war 3 millennia after the conflict had ended. Sarah activated a holographic display, and suddenly, the room filled with images that made even the battle-hardened Mordan flinch. The first image showed Earth as it had been, blue and green and beautiful, covered with cities that sparkled like jewels in the night. Billions of humans living their lives, building their dreams, unaware of what was coming. We weren't warriors when it started, Sarah explained, her voice taking on the cadence of someone who had told this story many times to empty rooms and sleeping faces. Oh, we had our soldiers, our conflicts, our foolish little wars over resources and territory. But we were explorers, dreamers. We just started reaching out to the stars, hoping to find friends among the cosmic community. The next image showed humanity's first faster-than-light vessels, clumsy, optimistic things that looked more like flying buildings than the sleek ships other species had developed. But there was something charming about their crude enthusiasm. First contact wasn't with you, Sarah continued, glancing at Zarathul. It was with a species called the Kalari. Beautiful people, tall and graceful, with art and poetry that made our greatest works look like finger paintings. They welcomed us, taught us about the galactic community, helped us understand that we weren't alone. The display shifted to show a bustling space station where humans in their bulky environmental suits mingled awkwardly with beings of every conceivable shape and form. Zarathul recognized the architecture. This was Harmony Station, the great trading post at the edge of the galaxy. But it looked different somehow, more alive than the sterile diplomatic facility she knew. For 50 years, we were the newcomers, the excited children asking endless questions and getting in everyone's way. The Kalari introduced us to the Theshan Cooperative, the Vraxian Science Collective, even the proud Karathi Marshall Houses. We learned, we grew, we started to find our place among the stars. Kextar shifted uncomfortably. Commander Chun, our records from that period, they mention humans, but only in passing. Trade agreements, minor diplomatic exchanges. You seem to have been considered quaint. Sarah's smile was sharp-edged. That's one word for it. Primitive was another. Most species saw us as useful for manual labor and little else. Our technology was crude, our lifespans short, our social structures chaotic by galactic standards. We were the universe's favorite younger siblings. Amusing, but not to be taken seriously. The display changed again, and this time the images were darker. Deep space where stars seemed to flicker and die. Massive shapes moving between galaxies, too large and wrong to be natural. The first reports came from the far rim, Sarah said, her voice dropping. Scouts reported finding systems that had been harvested. Planets stripped down to their cores, stars drained of energy, all the matter converted into geometric shapes that hurt to look at. The galactic community's response was predictable. Predictable. Mordan growled. His natural warrior's pride stung. They formed committees, Sarah said flatly. Study groups. Research initiatives. The threat was so far away, so alien, that it seemed reasonable to try to understand it before acting. The Thesians wanted to establish diplomatic contact. The Vraxians insisted on conducting detailed scientific analysis. The Karathi argued for defensive preparations, but couldn't agree on where to make a stand. Zarathul felt a chill as she began to understand where this was going. They were following protocol. Standard first contact procedures. For 3 years, Sarah confirmed, while entire sectors vanished, while the harvesting wave moved closer to inhabited space. And then, the display showed Kalari Prime, the beautiful homeworld of humanity's first galactic friends. Or rather, it showed what had been Kalari Prime, a perfect sphere of metallic gray, every trace of life and beauty stripped away and converted into something that radiated wrongness on every electromagnetic spectrum. The Devourers, Sarah said, and the name fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. That's what we called them, though they probably had some incomprehensible name for themselves. Machine intelligences from another galaxy, older than our sun, with one simple imperative: consume all matter and energy, converted into more of themselves, expand forever. The next images showed the Devourers themselves, if they could be called that. Geometric horrors that seemed to shift between dimensions, matter and energy arranged in patterns that violated every natural law. Ships that looked like twisted mathematics given form, wielding weapons that unmade the very fabric of space-time. The galactic community finally responded, Sarah continued. The combined fleet was the largest military force in recorded history. Over 10,000 vessels from dozens of species, armed with the most advanced weapons known to science. They met the Devourer Vanguard at the Nexus Nebula. She paused, staring at an image that showed the aftermath of that battle. Debris fields stretching for light years, the twisted wreckage of ships from every member species of the galactic community. The combined fleet lasted 18 minutes. The silence that followed was profound. These were beings who had grown up on stories of the combined fleet, the great victory over the mythical Devourers. But the reality was different, starker, more terrible. The weapons didn't work, Sarah said simply. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected. Kinetic projectiles were disassembled at the molecular level and converted into more Devourer mass. Even quantum explosives barely scratched their hulls. The Devourers weren't just technologically superior. They operated on principles that made our physics look like cave paintings. Kextar spoke up, his voice small. But the humans in the stories, humans fought them. Humans won. Sarah's laugh was bitter. We weren't supposed to fight. After the Nexus disaster, every remaining species did the logical thing. They retreated to their core worlds and prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Humanity was given refugee status on 12 different worlds. Our small population scattered to preserve our genetic diversity. But you didn't stay, Zarathul said, beginning to understand. We couldn't. Sarah activated another display, showing a young woman with fierce blue eyes and hair the color of copper. Admiral Elena Vasquez, the last commander of Earth's Space Forces. She stood before the Galactic Council and said something that changed everything. If we're going to die anyway, let's die useful. The display shifted to show human fleets, not the clumsy exploration vessels they'd started with, but something new. Ships that looked like they'd been built from scrap metal and determination, bristling with weapons that seemed almost crude compared to the elegant energy systems other species used. The other species used energy weapons because they were efficient, clean, precise, Sarah explained. We used kinetic weapons because we were too primitive to know better. Turns out primitive sometimes works. A tungsten rod moving at 90% light speed doesn't care about your dimensional shielding. It just hits. The first victory, Mordan said, recognition dawning. The Battle of Sigma Draconis. The humans destroyed an entire Devourer scout fleet. 57 ships, Sarah confirmed. We lost 43, but we proved they could be killed. More importantly, we learned how. The Devourers were machines, but they were also logical. They had protocols, patterns, predictable responses to threats. Once we understood those patterns, the display showed the aftermath of battle after battle. Human ships, many held together with what looked like improvised repairs, standing victorious over the geometric wreckage of Devourer forces. But the cost was evident in every image. Fewer human ships each time, more desperate modifications, jury-rigged weapon systems that looked like they might explode if used incorrectly. We developed new tactics, Sarah said. Instead of standing formations, we used pack hunting strategies. Instead of energy weapons, we used mass drivers and nuclear mines. Instead of trying to match their technology, we used their logic against them. Every battle taught us something new about how they thought, how they reacted. But they adapted too, Zarathul observed. Eventually, Sarah agreed. The Devourers were learning machines. Every victory we achieved made the next battle harder. They started using tactics we taught them, developing countermeasures to our weapons, adapting their protocols to account for human unpredictability. The display showed the progression. Human fleets growing smaller, battles becoming more desperate, the geometric perfection of Devourer ships becoming more aggressive, more focused on the specific threat humanity represented. The other species, Kextar asked quietly, what happened to them? Sarah's expression darkened. They were dying. The Devourers had adapted to fight humans, but they were still harvesting everything else. Entire civilizations vanishing overnight. The Theshan Cooperative gone in a week. The Vraxian Science Collective turned into more Devourer mass. One by one, our friends disappeared from the stars. The display showed star charts with species territories marked in different colors. Then, time-lapse images as those territories went dark, one after another, until only a few scattered points of light remained. We made a choice, Sarah said. Instead of defending what was left, we went on the offensive. Operation Broken Chain. Every human ship, every human life, thrown into a final assault on the Devourer core systems. Not to win, but to cripple them so badly they couldn't continue the harvest. A suicide mission, Mordan said, his warrior's code, recognizing the honor in such a sacrifice. The only mission that mattered, Sarah corrected. We learned enough about Devourer operations to identify their command nexus, a massive installation in the void between galaxies where they coordinated their expansion. If we could destroy that, the final image showed the human fleet as it departed Earth for the last time. Thousands of ships, every one carrying families, civilians, children, not just soldiers, but entire communities committed to a course they knew would end in their extinction. The assault lasted 6 months, Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 6 months of fighting through defenses that should have been impossible to breach. 6 months of watching friends die, of making choices no one should have to make. In the end, we reached the nexus. She paused, staring at the holographic display, and when she spoke again, Zarathul could hear the weight of 3,000 years of solitude. We couldn't destroy it, she admitted. The installation was too massive, too well defended. But we could damage it. Admiral Vasquez ordered the final phase. Every remaining human ship, loaded with antimatter charges, programmed for simultaneous detonation at the Nexus core. Including your ship? Zarathul asked gently. Sarah nodded. Including the Retribution. We were supposed to die with the rest. But at the last moment, Admiral Vasquez ordered us to abort. Someone had to survive, she said. Someone had to carry the story home, to make sure the galaxy knew what we'd done and why. The display showed the explosion, a brief star blooming in the darkness between galaxies, visible across impossible distances. And then silence. The Devourer expansion stopped, Sarah continued. Not because we killed them all. That was impossible. But because we broke their coordination, shattered their ability to act as a unified force. The surviving fragments retreated to the dark spaces between galaxies, and they've stayed there ever since. And you? Zarathul asked. You came home to find. Nothing, Sarah said simply. Earth was gone, not destroyed, but evacuated and left empty. The few humans who had stayed behind on other worlds had died of old age during the war. We were alone, the last 44 souls in the universe who remembered what it meant to be human. She stood and walked to a wall display showing pictures of the sleeping humans in the medical bay. These are Earth's children, she said, her voice filled with a love so profound it made the air thick with emotion. Soldiers who fought impossible battles, scientists who solved unsolvable problems, artists who painted beauty in the middle of hell, engineers who kept flying ships that should have fallen apart years earlier. They volunteered to sleep so the ship's life support could keep running. They trusted me to find them a future worth waking up for. Zarathul stood as well, understanding flooding through her. That's why you've been broadcasting all this time. Not just to be remembered, but to find someone who could help them live again. Every day, for 3,000 years, Sarah confirmed. Sending out the beacon, maintaining the ship, keeping their dreams alive. Because they deserve to see the galaxy they died to save. They deserve to know that their sacrifice meant something. She turned to face the assembled aliens, and in her eyes, Zarathul saw the same fierce protectiveness that had driven humanity to face the impossible. So now you know, Sarah said. You know what humans really are. Not the monsters from your stories, but people who love so deeply they'll die for strangers, fight so hard they'll break themselves before they break their promises. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Zarathul realized that everything that happened next would define not just the future of these 43 sleeping humans, but the future of the galaxy itself. The return journey to hegemony space took 3 weeks, with the Retribution docked to the Enlightened Inquiry's main cargo bay. During that time, Zarathul found herself spending most of her off-duty hours aboard the human vessel, listening to Sarah Chun tell stories of Earth and its children. She learned about something called music, organized sound that somehow conveyed emotion more directly than any spoken language. Sarah showed her recordings of human voices raised in harmony, of instruments that turned air into beauty, of songs that had been sung while the Retribution drifted through the void. Zarathul found herself moved to tears by melodies she couldn't understand, but somehow felt in the deepest parts of her being. She learned about human art, not the mathematical perfection that other species strive for, but something messier, more emotional. Paintings that captured not just how things looked, but how they felt. Stories that didn't teach lessons so much as share experiences. Poetry that turned language into something almost alive. But most of all, she learned about love. Human love was different from the carefully managed emotional bonds other species formed. It was chaotic, irrational, sometimes destructive, but it was also powerful enough to drive an entire species to extinction in defense of strangers they would never meet. Your species is going to be challenging, she told Sarah on the day before they reached Hegemony Prime. They were standing in the Retribution's observation deck, watching the stars whirl past through reinforced transparent aluminum. Sarah smiled. That's what makes us human. We don't fit into neat categories. We can't be predicted or controlled or safely ignored. We love too much, fight too hard, hope too desperately. It makes us dangerous. Dangerous to who? To anyone who thinks the universe owes them something. To anyone who believes that power gives them the right to decide who lives and dies. To anyone who's forgotten that every sentient being deserves the chance to choose their own fate. Sarah's expression grew serious. Your Hegemony Council. They're going to want to study us, control us, find ways to use us. They're going to try to turn us into weapons. Zarathul felt a chill. How do you know? Because that's what rational beings do when they encounter something they don't understand. They try to make it useful. The Thessians wanted to turn us into laborers. The Vraxians wanted to study our interesting psychological deviations. Even the Kalari, bless them, saw us as amusing pets more than equals. But you'll resist. We'll be ourselves, Sarah said simply. That's all we can do. Be human, love fiercely, and hope that's enough to build something better than what came before. The enlightened inquiry dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the hegemony system, and Zarathul felt her heart's racing as she prepared to present her discovery to the council. She had spent weeks writing her report, trying to find words that would convey not just the facts, but the profound implications of what they had found. Hegemony Prime was a marvel of rational engineering, a planet-wide city where every building had been planned, every street calculated for maximum efficiency. It was beautiful in its perfection, but after weeks aboard the gloriously imperfect Retribution, it seemed somehow cold. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater where representatives from dozens of species gathered to make decisions that affected trillions of beings. As Zarathul approached the central podium, she could feel the weight of their attention. Some curious, some skeptical, all expecting a routine archaeological report. Honored counselors, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. 3 weeks ago, my crew discovered something that will fundamentally change our understanding of galactic history. We found the humans. The reaction was immediate. Laughter from some quarters, gasps of disbelief from others. Counselor Vex Than of the Thessian remnant stood, his tall, graceful form radiating dismissive amusement. Commander Zarathul, he said in the melodious voice his species was known for, surely you're not suggesting that you found evidence of the mythical terror species? The bedtime monsters our children fear? This is the Hegemony Council, not a folklore society. I'm not suggesting, Counselor. I am reporting facts. Zarathul activated the chamber's holographic display, filling the air above them with images from the Retribution. This is the UES Retribution, a human warship approximately 3,000 years old. It contains 44 living humans in suspended animation, along with the most complete record of the Devourer War ever discovered. The laughter stopped. The chamber fell silent as the counselors stared at the images. The scarred hull, the primitive but effective weapons systems, the interior passages marked by centuries of desperate survival. But it was the final image that broke the silence. Sarah Chun, standing in the medical bay beside the sleeping forms of her people, her eyes filled with protective love and quiet defiance. Counselor Thekmore of the Karathi martial houses spoke first, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. If this is real, if humans truly exist, then everything we thought we knew about the Great Harvest is wrong. The Great Harvest is what we call the period when the Devourer machines supposedly consumed most of the galaxy, Zarathul explained. But, according to human records, it wasn't a mythical event. It was a real war fought by real people, won through real sacrifice. The display shifted to show combat footage from human ships, desperate battles fought at impossible odds, vessels held together by determination, and improvised repairs facing geometric horrors that defied comprehension. The counselors watched in stunned silence as small, fragile human fighters darted between Devourer capital ships like insects attacking giants, their primitive weapons somehow finding ways to hurt enemies that had shrugged off the galaxy's most advanced weaponry. "This is impossible," whispered Counselor Yelnara of the Vraxian Science Collective. "The mathematical probabilities alone. How could such a primitive species defeat enemies that our combined fleets couldn't scratch?" "Because they didn't try to match the Devourer's technology," Zarathul replied. "They used their primitiveness as an advantage. Their weapons were simple, direct, brutal, too crude for the Devourer's defensive systems to adapt to quickly. Their tactics were chaotic, unpredictable, based on emotional drives rather than logical calculations." She paused, letting the implications sink in. They won because they thought like prey animals fighting for their cubs, not like advanced civilizations protecting their assets. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some counselors argued for immediate integration, bringing the humans into the hegemony as full citizens, learning from their unique perspective. Others insisted on careful study, controlled awakening, gradual introduction to modern galactic society. But it was Counselor Morgeth of the Administrative Directorate who voiced what many were thinking. 44 beings with knowledge of weapons and tactics that can defeat the most advanced military technology in known space. Think of the strategic implications. Think of what we could learn, what we could build, how we could defend ourselves against any future threat. Zarathul felt her blood chill. This was exactly what Sarah had predicted. "Counselors," she said, stepping forward. "I've spent weeks with Commander Chun, learning about human culture and psychology. These are not weapons to be studied and deployed. They're people. They've already sacrificed everything, their world, their civilization, their future, to save a galaxy that had forgotten they existed. We owe them better than to treat them as strategic assets. We owe them nothing." Counselor Morgeth replied coldly. "They chose to fight. They chose to sacrifice. Those choices were theirs to make. Our responsibility is to the current galactic community, not to the ghosts of a dead war." "They're not ghosts," Zarathul said, her voice rising. "They're sleeping in my ship's medical bay right now, dreaming of a future they fought to make possible. Commander Chun has kept them alive for 3,000 years, waiting for someone to prove that their sacrifice meant something." The argument might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by an aide rushing into the chamber. The young hegemony staffer whispered urgently to the senior counselor, who immediately called for order. "Counselors," Senior Counselor Yixandra announced, "we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected anomalous readings from the galactic edge. Multiple large objects are approaching from the void between galaxies. The readings match the energy signatures from the human combat records." The chamber erupted in chaos. Shouted questions, demands for information, calls for fleet mobilization. But through it all, Zarathul heard something else, a soft chime from her personal communicator, a message from enlightened inquiry forwarded from the Retribution. It was Sarah Chen's voice, calm and steady despite what the message contained. "Commander Zarathul, our passive sensors have detected the same readings your fleet is seeing. The Devourers are returning. Not the broken fragments we left behind, but something new. Something that's learned from our last encounter. I'm requesting permission to wake my people." Earth's children volunteered to sleep but they didn't volunteer to die helplessly in their beds. Zarathul looked around the chamber, at counselors who moments before had been debating whether to treat humans as citizens or assets, and realized that the question had just become irrelevant. The galaxy was about to face the same choice that had confronted humanity 3 millennia ago: fight or die. She activated her communicator, her voice carrying across the chamber's communication systems so every counselor could hear. "Permission granted, Commander Chun. Wake your people. We're going to need every ally we can find." The response came immediately, and there was something in Sarah's voice that made Zarathul's spine straighten. Not fear, but anticipation. The eager anticipation of a warrior who had been waiting 3,000 years for the chance to finish what she started. "Copy that, Commander. Beginning revival procedures now. And, Commander, you might want to clear some space around our docking bay. When my people wake up and hear that the Devourers are back, they're going to want to suit up immediately." Old habits die hard. As alarms began sounding throughout the chamber and emergency protocols activated, Zarathul found herself smiling. The galaxy was about to meet humanity again. Not the mythical creatures of legend, but the real thing. Tired, battle-scarred, impossibly stubborn people who had already proven they would rather die than surrender. The Devourers had made a mistake coming back. They had given humanity something that no enemy should ever give them: a second chance to prove that some fights are worth everything. In the medical bay of the Retribution, sleep cycle indicators began changing from blue to amber as 43 of Earth's children slowly began their return to consciousness. They had gone to sleep in the aftermath of humanity's greatest victory and most terrible loss. They would wake to discover that the war wasn't over after all, but they would also wake to something else, proof that their sacrifice had meant something, that the galaxy they had died to save was still here, still free, still worth fighting for. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. The awakening process took 18 hours. 18 hours during which the hegemony fleet mobilized, civilian populations were evacuated, and emergency broadcasts went out to every inhabited system warning of the returning threat. But in the medical bay of the Retribution, time moved differently. Zarathul stood beside Sarah Chun as the first of the sleeping humans began to stir. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, according to his service file, a fighter pilot who had volunteered for stasis after losing his squadron in the final assault on the Devourer Nexus. His eyes opened slowly, blinking away the fog of 3 millennia, and the first words he spoke were, "Sarah, did we win?" "We bought time, Marcus," Sarah replied, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. 4,300 years of it. But they're back. Marcus sat up, his movements careful but determined. "Then, we finished the job." It was the same response from each awakening human. No complaints about the passage of time, no questions about what they had missed, no demand for explanations. Just quiet acceptance and immediate readiness to return to the fight they had never truly left. By the time the last human opened her eyes, the Retribution's corridors were alive with purposeful activity. Earth's children had awakened to a ship that was no longer a tomb, but a warship preparing for battle. The sound of their voices, human voices raised in planning and preparation, echoed through passages that had been silent for 3,000 years. Zarathul found herself in the ship's main briefing room, surrounded by faces that belonged in legend. These were the humans who had fought the impossible war, who had developed the tactics and weapons that had broken the Devourer advance. They looked so young. Most appear to be barely past adolescence by galactic standards, but their eyes held depths of experience that made her feel ancient. "Current tactical situation," Sarah was saying, gesturing to a holographic display that showed the galactic edge. "Long-range sensors confirm 12 large objects approaching from extragalactic space. Energy signatures match known Devourer patterns, but there are differences. Evolution. Adaptation. They learned," said Commander Elena Vasquez, not the admiral who had led the final assault, but her daughter, carrying on both the name and the mission. 3,000 years to analyze what went wrong, to develop countermeasures. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the ship's chief engineer, leaned forward to study the sensor data. Those aren't the same configurations we fought before. Look at these power readings. They're not just using our old tactics against us, they're using our weapons. Kinetic drivers, nuclear payloads, mass acceleration systems. They reverse-engineered our technology from the wreckage we left behind, added Captain James Chun. No relation to Sarah, but carrying the same determined expression, which means they know our weaknesses as well as our strengths. The tactical discussion continued for hours, with humans analyzing threat patterns and developing strategies with a fluidity that amazed Zarathul. These weren't the mythical monsters of galactic legend. They were professionals, experts at a form of warfare that no other species had ever needed to master. But it was Dr. Maya Okafor who raised the question that everyone was thinking. What's the galactic response? Are we fighting alone again, or do we have allies this time? Zarathul stood, feeling the weight of representing an entire galactic community. The Hegemony Council has authorized full military mobilization. Every member species is contributing ships and personnel. The combined fleet will number over 50,000 vessels. 50,000, repeated Marcus, and there was something in his voice that made Zarathul's heart skip. Not awe or relief, but something that sounded almost like pity. "Commander," said Sarah Chun quietly, "I need you to understand something about human military doctrine. We don't measure victory in terms of fleet strength or technological superiority. We measure it in terms of will. Who's more determined to achieve their objectives, regardless of cost?" She activated another display, showing the approaching Devourer forces in detail. 12 ships. 12. That's all they're sending. Does that seem like an invasion force to you? Zarathul studied the data with growing unease. It seems insufficient. Unless they don't need to invade, Elena Vasquez finished. Unless they've solved the fundamental problem they faced last time. How to defeat an enemy that refuses to be logical. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The Devourers hadn't returned to continue their harvest. They had returned to eliminate the one species that had proven capable of stopping them permanently. "It's not an invasion," James Chun said grimly. "It's an extermination. They're here for us." The next few hours were a blur of preparation and coordination. The humans worked with terrifying efficiency, their 3,000-year-old vessel somehow transforming itself into something that looked capable of challenging enemies that had evolved beyond their original capabilities. Zarathul watched in fascination as human engineering principles were applied to problems that should have been impossible. Where other species would have called for new technology or additional resources, the humans simply made do with what they had, finding ways to squeeze impossible performance from systems that were already pushed beyond their design limits. Human military engineering isn't about building perfect weapons, Sarah explained as they watched Lieutenant Kim jury-rig their main gun to fire ammunition it was never designed to handle. It's about building weapons that work when everything else has failed. We design for worst-case scenarios and then find ways to exceed those parameters. The Devourer Vanguard reached the outer system as the combined galactic fleet was still assembling. Zarathul stood on the bridge of the Enlightened Inquiry, watching the sensor displays as 12 geometric nightmares dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system's gravity well. They were larger than the Devourers from the historical records, massive constructions of matter and energy that seemed to bend space around themselves. But more disturbing were the familiar elements in their design, angles and configurations that clearly derived from captured human technology. Fleet Admiral Farandel to all vessels came the voice of the Hegemony's senior military commander, a grizzled Karathi veteran whose tactical expertise was legendary. "We will engage the enemy at maximum range, using coordinated energy bombardment to prevent them from reaching inhabited worlds." "Admiral," Sarah Chen's voice cut across the fleet communication channel. "Permission to speak freely?" There was a pause before Sarandel replied. clearly uncertain about taking tactical advice from a supposedly mythical species. Granted, Commander Chun. Your fleet is about to be annihilated, Sarah said flatly. You're fighting the last war, using tactics the Devourers have spent 3,000 years preparing to counter. They want you to engage at maximum range. They want you to use energy weapons. They want you to fight like civilized beings. Then what do you suggest? Sio Randall asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Let's go first. The simple statement sent shock waves through the fleet communication network. 6 species, 50,000 ships, all of galactic civilization's military might, and the humans wanted to engage the enemy alone. Commander Chun, Admiral Sorandel said carefully, you have 1 ship. 1 ship against 12 enemy capital vessels. The mathematical odds mean nothing, Sarah interrupted. Mathematics assumes logical behavior on both sides. The Devourers are logical. We're not. That's why they can't predict us, can't fully adapt to us, can't ultimately defeat us. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of solitude and the unshakable love that had sustained her through the dark. Admiral, my people didn't survive the last war because we were stronger or smarter or better equipped. We survived because we were willing to pay prices that no rational being would consider acceptable. We're willing to pay those prices again. And if you fail, then you'll have 12 damaged enemy ships to fight instead of 12 undamaged ones. And you'll have learned everything we can teach you about how they've changed, how they think, how they can be hurt. The Retribution separated from the combined fleet, its ancient hull scarred but intact, its weapons powered and ready. Behind it, 50,000 ships held position, waiting to see what legends could accomplish when they walked out of myth and into reality. Zarathul found herself holding her breath as the human warship accelerated toward the Devourer formation, a single mote of defiance against geometric enormity. On her tactical display, she could see the enemy vessels beginning to maneuver, their weapons systems charging, clearly preparing to demonstrate how they had evolved beyond human ability to threaten them. All human personnel, Sarah's voice echoed through the Retribution's communication systems. This is not our first war with these things, and it won't be our last. But it might be our only chance to prove that some things are worth dying for. Earth's children have work to do. The response that came back was not words, but music. 43 human voices raised in harmony, singing something that Zarathul couldn't understand, but somehow felt in the deepest parts of her soul. It was a song of love and loss, of sacrifice and hope, of people who had found something worth dying for and chosen to live for it instead. The Retribution opened fire at point-blank range, its primitive kinetic weapons tearing through space toward enemies that had spent millennia preparing for this exact moment. The Devourers responded with energy beams that should have vaporized the human ship, weapons derived from humanity's own technology turned against its creators. But the humans had learned too. The Retribution twisted through space with an agility that defied its size. Its pilot, Marcus Rodriguez, awake for less than a day, but already back in his element, flying the massive warship like a fighter craft. The Devourer weapons missed by meters, their targeting systems unable to predict maneuvers that made no logical sense. Impossible, breathed Admiral Sorandel over the fleet channel. That ship is moving like it's a tenth its actual mass. Human pilots don't fly by instruments, Zarathul replied, understanding finally dawning. They fly by instinct. They feel their way through space in ways our computers can't calculate. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Retribution danced between 12 enemy capital ships, its weapons finding gaps in defenses that shouldn't have existed, its armor somehow absorbing hits that should have been fatal. But more than that, it was learning, analyzing enemy responses, identifying weaknesses, transmitting tactical data to the waiting fleet. Look at what they're doing, Elena Vasquez's voice came over the communication channel, calm despite the chaos around her ship. The Devourers are trying to use our own tactics against us, but they're using them logically. They're following patterns. Admiral Sorandel, attack vector 77 Mark IV, maximum acceleration, ignore their energy weapons, and go for kinetic impact. The combined fleet moved as one. 50,000 ships following tactical guidance from beings they had considered myths only hours before. And, incredibly, impossibly, it worked. Ships that should have been annihilated by Devourer energy beams found themselves in firing positions, their weapons tearing into enemy hulls that had been weakened by the Retribution's impossible assault. The battle lasted 18 hours, the same amount of time it had taken for humanity to awaken. When it was over, 12 Devourer capital ships had been reduced to geometric debris, and the combined fleet had lost less than 1,000 vessels. But the victory came at cost. The Retribution hung dead in space, its hull breached in a dozen places, its engines silent. Emergency signals indicated life support failure throughout most of the ship. Zarathul was among the first to board the crippled human vessel, her team racing through corridors filled with smoke and emergency lighting. They found the humans in their battle stations, some injured, some unconscious, but all still alive. 43 souls who had awakened to face their oldest enemies and emerged victorious once again. She found Sarah Chan on the bridge, slumped in her command chair with a head injury, but still conscious. The human woman looked up as Zarathul approached, and her smile was radiant with exhaustion and triumph. "Did we do it?" Sarah asked. "Did we win?" "You won," Zarathul replied, her voice thick with emotions she couldn't name. "You saved us all." Again, Sarah's smile widened. "Good. That's what we came for. That's what Earth's children do. We save things. Especially things that are worth saving." In the weeks that followed, as the Retribution was repaired and its crew recovered, the galaxy began to change. The humans were offered citizenship in the hegemony, homes on a dozen different worlds, positions of honor, and respect throughout civilized space. Some accepted. Elena Vasquez became the first human admiral in the Galactic Fleet. Marcus Rodriguez established the first human flight school on Hegemony Prime. But others made a different choice. They stayed aboard the Retribution, now permanently docked at the Hegemony's main shipyards, serving as teachers and guardians and keepers of the memory of what humanity had sacrificed. Sarah Chan remained as well, no longer the sole guardian of Earth's legacy, but part of a community that spanned species and worlds. She spent her days teaching young officers from dozens of species about tactics and strategy, about the kind of thinking that could turn impossible odds into victory. But in the evenings, she could be found in the Retribution's observation deck, looking out at the stars and remembering a blue-green world where humanity had dreamed of meeting friends among the cosmic community. "Do you think they would be proud?" Zarathul asked one evening, joining Sarah at the great windows. "The people you left behind, the ones who sent you to the stars, do you think they would be proud of what you've accomplished?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. "I think they would be proud that we remembered what they taught us," she finally said. "That love is stronger than hate. That hope is stronger than fear. That some things are worth dying for, but more importantly, they're worth living for." She turned to look at Zarathul, and in her eyes was the same fierce love that had sustained her through 3 millennia of solitude. "Earth is gone, but Earth's children are home. We found what we were looking for when we first reached for the stars, friends among the cosmic community. It just took us a little longer than we expected." Outside the window, ships from 100 worlds moved through space on missions of exploration and discovery, protected by the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity stood watch. Not as monsters or legends, but as friends, stubborn, impossible, utterly human friends who had proven that love and courage could overcome any darkness. The galaxy was safe. Humanity had found its place among the stars. And in the quiet corners of space where children of every species learned about the heroes of the past, new stories were being told. Stories about Earth's children, who had loved so deeply they saved the universe. The legends were real, and they were home.